Welcome in to weekly live draft coverage of the Fantasy Pros Championship. I'm your host, as always, Aiden LaCorey. Joining me as my co-host for today's show, Eric Balkman. Balky, how you doing, sir?
Doing good. Excited to do this tonight. I was actually thinking about this.
Okay,
you know what? Here's the thing. We're gonna have some lulls in the draft tonight, and I'm gonna bring up this point later on because we just had a bomb drop at the 101. But it goes to my point that I was gonna make, that everybody always tunes in for these. Everybody wants to watch these because nobody comes on here to draft an ADP team. Nobody wants to go on YouTube and draft for $1 million and then just basically go right down the rankings. People tune in because fireworks happen in this draft. People tune in and people draft in this format because they want to create the fireworks. And we got one at the 101 tonight. Mother of God.
What do you, any words for that? I mean, I think Fantasy Mojo, I'm sure we'll discuss it either tonight or tomorrow. That has to be the first time Amon-Ra St. Brown has gone first overall in this format.
Yeah, so we have Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 101, and I just brought up the Fantasy Mojo on this right now. And by the way, if you're playing in the FFPC and you are not subscribing to Fantasy Mojo, quite frankly, you're doing it wrong. At Fantasy Mojo on X, FantasyMojo.com. Darren Armani runs it. He's the godfather of the Pros vs. Joes Challenge. And according to the Fantasy Pros Championship, within the last 5 days, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the highest he's gone is the 103. He has an ADP of the 108. And Team 1 gets their guy tonight to take advantage of having that 101 to draft Amon-Ra St. Brown. God bless him.
I mean, I think you said it eloquently and put it perfectly, but there's something exciting about specifically this format, even more so than the main event, more so than even sometimes the best balls you see, although obviously best ball and then Fantasy Pros main event are two different formats. But the Fantasy Pros Championship, every stream we do is drastically different. And that may be for some people, that goes without saying, but it really is different than other streams we do. I mean, we started doing our weekly coverage of this event last year, every Tuesday. We're continuing that this year. And I think we did about 10 last year. Now this is our second one this year. Our first one was last week. And it's just been the same thing where it's just, as the chat is saying, it's really every owner takes it as go get your guy. You said it, ADP is thrown out the window. And I mean, the most likely format in which to see fireworks and just craziness is this one. It's just, it always delivers in that. I mean, that one is crazy to me. I wasn't expecting that one off the bat because just,
but
that is something.
And that's my point too, that I was going to make, right? This is why we get so excited to cover these, because you don't see ADP boring drafts, right? These are the drafts that people do. And they or people watch and they're like, well, why can't I be in this draft? Why can't I get in drafts like this? Why can't I have the 102 when the guy at 101 takes Amon-Ra St. Brown? You know, why can't I? But I mean, that's the thing. It's like we live vicariously through drafts like this because the people who draft in this want to stand out. They want to shock the world. They want to show you that there is a what's the Seth MacFarlane movie? There are 1 million ways to die in the West. There's a million ways to win the Fantasy Pros Championship $1 million grand prize, right? And Amon-Ra St. Brown at 101 is certainly a strategy to do it. And by and large, if you look at the rest of the round, there wasn't anything really surprising here as far as ADP goes. I mean, everybody else kind of went, where they've normally been going. I was listening to Theo Greminger, who's actually going to be on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show this Thursday with Dave Terpoli on the Better Sports Network. I was listening to him do a podcast with I think it was First Class Fantasy, if I remember. Maybe it's Press Coverage. I can't keep them straight. They do so many good podcasts over there. He was interviewing Darren Armani, and Darren said what he has seen so far this year is a lot of people going bully tight end at the 11 or 12 spot. And Aiden, we see that tonight again with Laporta and Kelsey going to the 12.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Amon-Ra is obviously the curveball there at the 101. And then, as you said, it's a pretty by-the-books 2 through 11. I wouldn't say it's obviously it's nowhere near the equivalent of going Amon-Ra first overall. But what is your thoughts? So you were saying you're listening to the pod. What are your thoughts on doubling up at tight end and going Laporta and Kelsey?
I think it has its merits. And Theo kind of pointed out, like, if you end up getting tight end 1 and tight end 2 with those players, then yeah, you're in a really good position. But he uses the phrase, threading the needle, which I think it is, because how often can we figure out before the season starts? I don't care if you're drafting in January or even September. How do we know who the top two players at any position are going to be? We think we know. We draft that way, but we don't know. And when you're trying to use your first two picks to draft the top two players at the tight end position, it is like threading a needle. It's very, very difficult to do. Now, they don't have to be the tight end 1 and tight end 2 at the end of the season. If they're 2 of the top 4 or 2 of the top 3, or even 2 of the top 5, I think it has some merit. I think that going tight end, and I haven't looked at the numbers on this. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I like forcing the issue when you're on the end, because it really it puts, it's kind of, it's not like going all in poker, but it's kind of like that, because you're putting you're putting the other 11 teams to a test of, okay, what are you going to do with your pick now? Now we see a guy taking 2 of the same position within the first 13 picks of the draft. Does that change what you're doing in the middle of the second round? Does that change what you're doing at the end of the third round? Because now you kind of got to react to that. People always talk about letting the draft come to them. Well, do you let the draft come to you and scoop up the value of running back and receiver? Or do you understand where it's going, where the draft is going, and maybe going away from you, and you feel like you have to take a tight end, maybe a round earlier, not overdrafting a tight end, but taking that position a round earlier than you thought? You're putting everybody else to a test to try to figure out, okay, now how do I adjust to that? And it makes people feel uncomfortable, and sometimes you're uncomfortable, you make wrong choices. So I think you get into a lot of problems if you go tight end. I haven't really seen that work out, where you just do 3 tight ends to start off your draft, but I've seen a lot of successful teams start off with tight ends as their first 2 picks.
Then, as you said, I mean, it's right around ADP for all of them, but 5 tight ends are going in the first 2 rounds. So, I mean, if one team is already jumping on 2 of them, it just pushes everything else up a bit. I want to kind of ask you just a general question. You're looking at this second round. Is there any name in this kind of mid to late second round that you think can push their way into the first round come the drafts in September in Las Vegas? Is there any name that stands out to you, or do you think kind of our first round is largely going to be set what it is, barring an injury?
Yeah, I think there's a few names here. Now these are not players. I don't think these players are going to be going in the first round, because by and large, the drafts you see right now, I think unless there's an injury or unless there's some sort of other catastrophic event, these guys are kind of locked in roughly to where they're going. What's great about the Fantasy Pros Championship and the FFPC main event, you're going to see people getting sick of taking. I got the 2, or I got the 106. I'm sick of taking, Jamar Chase there. I'm going to spice things up. I'm going to grab AJ Brown there instead, right? And then that creates a butterfly effect, right, or a domino effect, whatever.
Yeah.
That often puts other people in different positions than they expected to be in. I had a buddy. Interesting story. I had a buddy that I know locally. He was on my my rec league basketball team for many years. And he's really, really good in his home leagues, really, really good. And he thought, he played in the main event a couple of years ago, FFPC main event. And he thought he was going to walk in and just destroy the league, right? And he told me his strategy before the draft, and he had everything mapped out. He's like, and then when it gets to the 5-6 turn, I'm going to take probably 2 or 3 of these guys right here. And then when I get to the 10-11 pick, I'm gonna draft the quarterback here, and then I'm gonna grab this guy. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm saying outwardly, I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a good strategy. Any FFPC player who hears that is like, dude, you can't do that. It doesn't work that way, because all the different ways that these drafts fall in any individual. It's like a baseball game, right? Baseball season, there's 162 games. And things even out over the course of time. Yeah. But in one individual game, in one individual draft, one pick can really send things into a frenzy. And I don't think it happened tonight with Amon-Ra St. Brown, but the night is young. Anyway, getting back to your original question, I think based on what we see here tonight, or what we see in the preseason and preseason games, there are some players that if they make one big play, or the news is really positive, especially what we saw with Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua last year, people are going to go a little nuts for certain players. Now, you look at let's just take the second round here, for example, tonight. No question, Jahmyr Gibbs will sneak into a lot of first rounds. In fact, his ADP, I think, is at the 111 right now, so I'll throw him out. But Drake London, given the new quarterback situation there, if Kirk Cousins is spinning it and his Achilles looks healthy, I could see him sneaking up into the first round. Marvin Harrison is going to get some action in the preseason. He has to. He's a young player. He's a rookie. He wants to get acclimated to the league and get some chemistry with his new quarterback. If he makes a few big plays and he looks like a man amongst boys again, then yeah, you're looking at him potentially sneaking up to the first round. Kyron Williams, I think, has a chance, but it's not necessarily relying on him. It's going to be relying on, how Blake Corum looks and the Rams offense in general. But I think those two receivers right there, Harrison and London, I don't necessarily think either of them will get into the first round, but I do think that if in the second round tonight, those guys would probably be my choices of the guys most likely to.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because one, it's you also looking at the average fantasy player. We like what's new, but what's also very trendy. And right, Drake London has been flashes of just oozes potential. And now you're hoping is he finally has a quarterback after 2 years of just dealing with a quarterback wasteland. And then obviously Marvin Harrison is one of the most talented rookie prospects to ever come into the league in recent memory. And he landed in a pretty good spot for fantasy, many would argue. So, I mean, you would think that a couple of big preseason plays and people just start pushing him up because, I mean, I think it may sound crazy, but I think we're closer than people realize to a rookie being the number one overall receiver in fantasy like through their rookie year. I mean, you've seen what obviously Jamar Chase did. I mean, each year there's going to be even way back to like the Odell year, that rookie class. So it's going to be pushing. And I think will it ever happen? I don't know, but I think there's going to be some contenders, not saying Marvin Harrison is, but there's going to be some rookies who fall into spots where they could contend for that. And maybe Marvin Harrison is one of them. And just what we mean by like the FantasyPros Championship, you just throw ADP at the window. Kyron Williams goes at the 207 today. Our first coverage last week, he went in the mid-third. So just almost around a difference in that specific player, because especially this time of the year, things are kind of unknown. You're just starting kind of OTAs. And there's just rumors out there. You're not really seeing guys on the playing field. You're not seeing preseason depth charts aren't solidified by any means. So obviously stuff will change dramatically, especially in kind of those middle rounds. I wanted to ask you, what do you make?
Aiden, please. Before you say that, two things I want to point out that happened in the third round today.
Yeah.
Isaiah Pacheco went at the 301. Now, that is interesting, given that that's basically 2/3 of a round ahead of where he normally goes, which in the third round is still significant. Team one not only went Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 101, they took Andrews at the 212, which is a fine value. That's normally where it goes. But Pacheco going that much higher, team one is already my favorite team in this draft based on how they've been getting their guys. I always say get your guys, right? Steve Lamb, I think, was pointing that in the YouTube chat. But he not only went Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 101, he went Isaiah Pacheco at the 301, which is really high. In fact, over the last 5 days, that is the highest he's gone in any Fantasy Pros Championship draft, according to Darren Armani. What we were talking about before with the double tight ends and how that forces people to kind of figure out how they want to attack the position. Look at team 7 here, taking Kyle Pitts at the 307. Now, Kyle Pitts normally does not go until the end of the third round. However, when you're looking at the board, given that one team already had 2 tight ends, 5 tight ends were already off the board. If you like Pitts, you kind of got to pull the trigger there because he's not coming back to you. And maybe you change your strategy to take a tight end there that you hadn't planned on taking before, because you knew that there were 4 teams drafting back behind you and then in front of you in the next round where they're going to have 2 chances at tight end. And one of the team 11 did take a tight end there. But this is what we're talking about, how when somebody takes the second tight end early, everybody should, I'm not saying everybody does, everybody should think about adjusting their strategy a little bit. Sometimes if you don't, it works out. Sometimes if you do, it works out. But I think it's something you always have to consider.
Also, something that caught my eye in the third round, and you see sometimes contract disputes, situations cause some depression in player value in fantasy. Just there's that concern of what's the deal with them. Brandon Ayuk and the 49ers are going through it right now. They don't want him, he's saying. Doesn't seem like they're really any close to an extension. And there was a lot of rumblings, especially after they drafted Ricky Pearsall, that one of him or Debo would be out. It seems as though that at minimum, the Debo and Ayuk combo is going to last one more year. And then I don't think a lot of people think much past this year. 2025 likely one of them. People seem to be leaning Debo are going to be out of San Francisco. But with Ayuk kind of dealing with this contract situation, the unhappiness, in past years, in some player situations, you see a little drop. He's largely remained level in his ADP. So what are you making about Brandon Ayuk? He goes here at the 305. Is he a 49er, first of all, for you? Should he be getting drafted higher, or is he getting properly drafted with kind of some of the unknowns surrounding him?
There's a lot of stuff to unpack with this, right? Because I think, and I'll kick it off with this, fantasy players, especially high-stakes fantasy players, have gotten so much more intelligent about fantasy football in general than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. Perfect example of that is Raheem Mostert, who, I shouldn't say his name. He hasn't been drafted yet. But Raheem Mostert, 21 touchdowns last year, right? That guy should be a first-round pick the following year, right? No. In fact, he is not even close to that. According to the mojo on him, running back 28 at the 802. Fantasy players are letting a guy who scored 21 touchdowns slip into the 8th round this year. That's insane. Play in the FFPC. It's all minnows. Crush it, right? Not so fast, my friend, because they are not letting a 21 touchdown player slip to the 8th round. They're letting a 31-year-old running back slip to the 8th round. They're letting a player who's had a lot of history of injuries to the 8th round. They're letting a player slip who has heavy competition in his own backfield with significantly younger players slip to the 8th round. They're letting a player who plays a young man's position in the NFL, who is not a young man anymore, slipping to the 8th round. So this is what I'm talking about with players getting a lot smarter about it. Apply it to Brandon Ayuk, right? There's not a lot of stuff going on with football right now with the NFL. So we naturally gravitate to the stories that are real and that are being talked about, but we magnify them. It's not our fault. We do this because we crave football. We crave everything we can. And when you have a thing like Ayuk, it gets talked about more than it should. What recourse does he have? He's not going to hold out. The collective bargaining agreement doesn't allow him to do that. And if he does get traded, he's going to be traded off of a team that has George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, and Ricky Pearsall. He will leave that environment with superstars everywhere, or at least significant contributors everywhere, to go to a team that is A, going to give up draft capital to get him, B, going to pay him because otherwise it would be foolish to give up that draft capital, and C, they probably have a need for him, right? So even if you should almost root for him to get moved. This shouldn't be a selling situation for Ayuk. This should almost be a buying situation for Ayuk, because worst case scenario, he's back on an elite offense, catching balls from a quarterback that made a lot of great fantasy players last year, right? That's worst case. Best case, he goes to another team that desperately needs a wide receiver one, and he gets pumped full of 160, 170 targets, catches like 85, 90 balls this year, gets in the end zone 8 or 9 times, and then he outperforms this ADP. I think fantasy players understand this, and they know that, the news surrounding him, if you're a 49ers fan, maybe isn't great. But I think from a fantasy perspective, this is a situation that will either stay good or get better.
I'm going to skip the 4th round because this 5th round is fascinating. Mike Shope in the chat already pointed out one, but 2 big guys who fell relative to ADP. Josh Allen normally goes at the 403. He goes at the 503, almost around difference. Josh Jacobs usually goes at the 310. He goes at the 506 in this draft. So I want to hear your first overall. And James Cook also, in the last 5 days, this is the lowest he's ever gone in a FantasyPros Championship draft. So if you could just give me, we've had people on and through the Hardway draft. I think even way back in our first Never Too Early Best Ball coverage way back in early April, a lot of discussion about that Bills offense and the uncertainty. Josh Allen has still been going strong in that early 4th. Sometimes you even sometimes you even see him slip into that late 3rd. But today he goes at the 503. So give me your thoughts on the kind of the state of the Bills offense, what you're doing. And then you're the guy, as the resident Packers fan, to discuss Josh Jacobs at backfield and kind of your thoughts on that. I've heard Terp's whole stance on Marshawn Lloyd, but I want to go right to Wisconsin himself and hear about that. So let's start, though, with the Bills. What are you making of Josh Allen falling in this draft? Is that correct? Are you surprised by that?
So in typical bulky fashion, I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about before I answer these questions.
Please.
And the reason I do it is it sets up my answer for the Josh Allen thing.
For sure.
I think if you look at the 3rd round and then the 4th round especially, this almost seems like this is like an overzet pissing yellow draft, right? The receivers are getting pushed up a little bit. And as the receivers get pushed up, people have to fall. And Josh Allen is one of the players who fell. Josh Allen, for me, has been able to be a really successful fantasy football quarterback, even when he didn't have Stephon Diggs, right? Part of the reason we like Allen so much is his legs. And I know Buffalo does not want to use him in short yardage and use his legs as much this season. I think Josh Allen even said, Mike Shope would be able to talk about this better than I could, but I think he said something to the effect that he has to be smarter this year when he gets outside of the pocket, right, to stay healthy. Because quite frankly, if Allen goes down, the Bills go down. I don't know who the backup is. I don't think it matters. So we draft Allen based on his legs, and we see the Ray Davis acquisition. Outside of that, I don't think that they have like, this dominant goal line, like a Gus Edwards type guy. And I know the plan is for Allen not to be putting his body in harm's way. Well, that's a plan. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to actually do it. So until I actually see him not using his legs anymore, until I see him not being used in short yardage situations at the goal line, I'm going to continue to draft him as if he is still getting that, right? So Allen at the 503, I think, is a great pick, especially when you're considering you're getting him a round later than the first quarterback off the board, Jalen Hurts, who went at the 403, which I think that was kind of high above ADP, wasn't it? Or am I making that up? Yeah, it's about a round higher than ADP.
There's been a lot of ADP differences. It's almost tough to keep up in this draft. People are flying up and dropping down.
Yeah, and so I think with Allen at the 503, I have no problem with that. And until I see otherwise, when I'm watching Bills games this season, and if I see this season where he ends up getting 4 rushing touchdowns and Ray Davis collects 7 of them and 5 of them are inside the 2, then we can adjust for 2025. But I'm not doing that for 2024.
And
regarding,
I was just saying, Bob Morelli also point out, obviously season long managed, it's a little different, but still also not only got Josh Allen at the 503, Dalton Kincaid, he got a little stack there. And so he was able to get Derrick Henry and George Pickens.
And that's fantastic. I mean, to get Kincaid at the 210 and then get Josh Allen at the 503. I am of all the high stakes players I've talked with over the last 13 years of doing the HSFF hour, I wouldn't say everybody has said this, but I would be willing to say at least 85 to 90% of high stakes players have told me regarding stacking. It's fine if it happens, but they don't sweat it if it doesn't happen. I'm in a KFFSC draft right now, and I ended up getting Collins and Diggs. Collins, I think, in the second, and then Diggs in the fourth. And I had the opportunity to stack it, but I let Stroud go one more round, and he didn't come back to me. And I'm like, that stinks. And then I'm like, I don't care. It's one of those things. It's like it just rolls off me because we have seen stacking work, but we've also seen some really successful teams win, $500,000, $1 million grand prizes in the FFPC that didn't really have any stacking. So I don't think that's a big deal. I want to get back to the Packers question you asked me in regards to Josh Jacobs. I think going back to even when Mike McCarthy was there, and this has kind of continued to a certain extent under Matt LaFleur, the Packers do this thing where, and the data guys would be able to tell you about this better than I could. But from what I see, watching most of the games, they seem to have a rotation at running back where the starter will get 2 series and then the backup will get the next series. The starter will then get the next 2 series, and then the backup will get the series after that. This went back to like the Brandon Jackson, James Starks, Ryan Grant days, right? And it's kind of continued. We saw it kind of last year with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon too, right? And even when Jones was hurt and Dillon was the lead guy, you still saw a lot of rotation with Emmanuel Wilson, so on and so forth, and the other guys they had there. I have heard and read and seen a lot of Josh Jacobs hate over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Saying that he's being overvalued at where he currently goes. We look at the mojo on him, 310. It wasn't that long ago. And actually, when I click on his name on Fantasy Mojo, you can kind of see where he used to be going. This is a guy that was like early 3rd, sometimes late 2nd round, as far back as when he signed with the Packers in free agency, right? And now he's slipping more and more. And I think we're going to continue to see that. Part of that is the reports on Marshawn Lloyd have been very, very good. Part of it is Josh Jacobs is coming off a really bad year in Las Vegas. Now, a lot of stuff went really wrong for the Raiders last year, and I think I don't like to throw the baby out with the bathwater with Jacobs because I think in a better situation he would have had a much better year. He's in a better situation now. He's got a really good offensive line in front of him. He's got an up-and-coming offense. He's a guy that I think is going to continue to catch passes, which we all love. So I am not on the Josh Jacobs hate train yet. I think his ADP is fine where it is. And I think if you go receiver, or receiver tight end to start off your draft, and then you get Jacobs in the third, I think that's a fine way to do it.
Yeah, and the thing about Josh Jacobs too is we kind of talked earlier in regards to Ayuk about kind of situations and negative press and uncertainty surrounding contracts. The only thing that really concerns me when it comes to that, and obviously Ayuk, it's not affecting, but the idea of a holdout, and Josh Jacobs held out for a while last year, and it just you start behind. It's slower. It's been kind of proven that those guys, they don't hit the ground running week one. It takes them a bit to kind of ramp up, get their legs under them, and you saw that with Josh Jacobs, let alone it leaves them more susceptible to injury. Josh Jacobs is going to have a full offseason, hopefully a healthy offseason for him with the Packers. And as you said, just a better situation. But talk about a guy, and I don't have the math in front of me. In terms of some of these earlier rounds, he probably has the widest range of where he's going because he's gone anywhere from, as you said, so that late second, 208 is the earliest he's gone in the Fantasy Pros Championship. The latest he's gone now is the 506. So there's almost roughly a 3-round difference for Josh Jacobs over the last 5 days and where he's gone, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. You don't usually see that.
And he's at that point of the career of his career that, like, what if he was on a lesser team? Like, what if he was on the Vikings, like, instead of Aaron Jones, right? What if he was on the trying to think of another questionable team, or like, what if he's on the Panthers or something like that, right? So you got to balance out the fact that he's 27 years old this year, whatever it is, versus playing on an up-and-coming offense that looked really, really good down the stretch last season. So when you have to balance out those two things, which can really swing how running backs perform, you're going to get a wide variety of where that player is going to go in draft. So yeah, his ADP right now is 310, but he's gone as high as the 208. This is the latest we've seen him go in a Fantasy Pros Championship draft in the last 5 days at the 506 tonight. I think when he's at that late end of the spectrum, or that late end of the value here, that's when you got to pounce. You can't let him slip further than that. I would have taken him in the late fourth, quite frankly. And I wonder too, if team 6 ended up getting him there. I wonder if team 6 was thinking Rachaad White or Josh Jacobs at that spot. And then they went White, and they were pleased as punch to see Jacobs make it all the way back to him.
Speaking of the Raiders, you brought them up. Brock Bowers, and you kind of talked about early, we talked about, sometimes a team 12 doubled up on tight ends in round 1, 2. Does that push any up? Brock Bowers goes almost over a round early. He, on average, goes, again, last 5 days per Fantasy Mojo at the 611, goes at the 508. I think there's, to me at least, I love Brock Bowers as a prospect. He was brilliant at Georgia. I think there's almost a little bit too much of a recency bias where we saw such successful rookie tight ends last year, and that kind of throws away years of historical data that shows you're not going to hit on rookie tight ends no matter how good they are. Now, granted, the game has changed a lot, and I understand that, but Brock Bowers also is not in an ideal situation. The Raiders, they had that quarterback situation figured out a bit more, but I just want to hear your thoughts on Brock Bowers going that early. Are you buying him even at the first at the 508 as he went today, at the 611 with an uncertain quarterback situation, kind of an uncertain offense, really? What are you making with Brock Bowers and where are you taking him?
I almost think that because when you're in a draft like this, where you're trying to win $1 million, nobody's trying to just, come in second or anything like that. And when you have a guy taking 2 tight ends to start off the draft, I wonder if Bowers is a pick where you're like, I have to find an edge at tight end here somewhere. Here's where I find my edge. If Bowers hits and he really is the next great tight end, I get him at 508. Yeah, I know it's a little bit of reach at tight end 9, to get him here in the mid 5th round. But is he making it back to me in the 6th? Is the tight end that I get instead of, if I don't take Bowers here, Kittle, Njoku, Freiermuth, Goddard, the 4 tight ends that went after him, do those guys have the same upside to win $1 million? I don't know. My guess is no, but it's kind of the mystery box theory, right? Brock Bowers is a mystery box this year. And if you believe in the talent and need a tight end, as teammate did, then that makes perfect sense that why you would take him there. I can tell myself a story if I'm that team why Brock Bowers was the right pick there. Not only to have a successful season, but to win $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship. Me personally, I don't know if I would have won it, because I think there's a lot of players that would tell you, hey, that's great to try to, swing for the fences, but you still got to win your league. Like, you still got to get through your 12-team league, unless you have a really, really good team and you got a couple of outliers in your league. You still got to win your 12-team league. And maybe that's not the right pick there. But I applaud it. I think it's fine. And I think having the clarity and the vision for drafting him where he did in this specific draft tonight, it does make sense on several levels.
It was definitely tough. I think the Rams released a lot of their behind the scenes of the draft, and all the behind the scenes, Les Snead, Sean McVay were desperately trying to trade up. I believe it was with the Vikings to get Brock Bowers. And obviously he lands with the Raiders, where, it's an unknown new coaching staff. Gardner Minshew, I think Gardner Minshew, if I assume is going to be the starting quarterback, I don't know what they're going to go with, if they're going to try and give the Aiden O'Connell, the young guy, a shot. But if Gardner Minshew starting, you feel maybe a little more comfortable. He's shown competence. Him being the starter has resulted in good years for some receiving weapons from Michael Pittman last year, but still not ideal. And it's just, man, if he could have just gone to the Rams, then imagine what Sean McVay would have done with Brock Bowers. I lost my train of thought there. I was going to ask you something important.
I will say this, just regarding the Raiders quarterback situation. Farrell Elliott, my co-host on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, he has said on more than one occasion that he doesn't believe that Minshew is going to start. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he was very, very positive, very, very pro Aiden O'Connell, and he's in touch with these situations, and he believes that the Raiders, I think he believes the Raiders like Aiden O'Connell a lot more than we as fans like Aiden O'Connell as an NFL quarterback, rightly or wrongly, right? I mean, they could be wrong, we could be wrong. But yeah, I mean, I've said for months now, there are certain teams every year that you need to get right if you want to be successful in fantasy. The Raiders are one of them this year, right? You need to figure out where you stand on Zamir White. You need to figure out whether Devontae Adams is worth a late second, early third round pick. You have to figure out if Michael Mayer is being undervalued. You have to find out if Brock Bowers is being overdrafted. You have to find out if Jacoby Myers is a sleeping giant there for PPR leagues like the FFPC. There's so many different, again, polarizing players there. And we don't talk about it a whole lot because who wants to talk about the Raiders, right? It's not like it's an elite offense or anything like that. But all those players that are there are going to factor into leagues. I don't necessarily know if any of those are league winners, but there's certainly a non-zero chance that Bowers is. That could work out that way for sure.
I'm going to ask you about, I think you made a really good point bringing up there's some situations where it's not fun to try and figure out. It's not sexy to try and figure out, but you want to figure it out because there could be kind of fantasy gold there. One of those is the Commanders' backfield. Brian Robinson, has had to, especially last year, had some really strong fantasy performance, but they go ahead and get Austin Eckler. Both of them are going in the 9th round of this draft. Brian Robinson at the 905, Austin Eckler is 911.
And they both have identical 902 ADPs in the FantasyPros Championship.
They've been drafted almost neck and neck. Is there a lean towards one that you have, or is this a stay away situation? What do you make of that backfield?
Dave Gerzak, the Dizzle, who did the HSFF hour with me for years, he would always refer to players, oh, that guy's off my board. That guy's off my board. And yeah, I never like to eliminate anybody off my board. Somebody was just talking about this on a podcast I was listening to the other day, where they never like to say, I think it was Mike Schopp actually says, he's never going to say, like, I'm not going to draft this player. Like, everybody has value at the right spot, right? I would say I am not targeting either of those players this year, Robinson and Eckler. I would also say that dependent upon your team construction through the first 8 rounds, one of those players could be very valuable for you. I have always leaned towards, and in situations like this where they're basically going neck and neck, who do you pick? Give me the guy that catches passes. Eckler, I think, is a more proficient pass catcher. That's the tiebreaker I use in this situation. Robinson's going to get goal line. And if the Commanders have an awesome season with Jaden Daniels, maybe that's wrong. Maybe Robinson has like a Gus Edwardsian like season where he gets double-digit rushing touchdowns. I don't necessarily think Robinson is all that talented of a running back. I think Eckler is, even though he's on the backside of his career, but he's going to catch passes. there's an interesting situation in that backfield, right? Because Jaden Daniels really skilled with his legs, but he's also really undersized too. So how much are the Commanders going to want him trying to chew up yardage himself? We never like to draft pass catching running backs on teams with mobile quarterbacks because the quarterback is like, well, the hell with passing it to you when I can get 8 yards here myself without risking a pick, right? And Eckler can certainly do that. Daniels can certainly be that pass catcher. Daniels has the skill to get those yardages, that yardage, but he's 185 pounds or whatever it is. Is he going to be able to take that pounding? He's got to be able to be smart about it. I'd like to think that the direction the Commanders are going right now is the correct one, and that Austin Eckler's pass catching ability will not just be forgotten about. They went out and signed him, right? They went out and got him. But that's another situation too. What's going to win out, Daniel's legs or Eckler's hands? It's fascinating.
I mean, Eckler was kind of hard to watch, if we're being honest, down the stretch last year with coming off of the high ankle sprain. Just looked like he had completely lost a step. That, as I'm sure you're watching, the run against the Packers was just eye-opening, and it's just kind of how awful it was. He hit like 14 miles per hour. Just it was, the energy was sapped. And it's one of those situations you're trying to figure out how much of this was he just wasn't recovering in season from this tough injury, or how much is just he's an older running back and he's kind of on the real downslope of his career. And he had an interview recently, and he was kind of saying how the Chargers, he felt, weren't using him right. They were trying to give him a bunch of carries, and he wants to kind of get back to being the pass catching back, explosive with kind of limited touches. So, I mean, just even looking in these last couple rounds, there's a ton of backfields, and by no means am I comparing any of the individual players to Raheem Mostert, because one, the Dolphins offense, hard to replicate that in that situation. Yeah. But there's a lot of these guys where that Mostert was in the similar range, where if you can hit, it can really, really improve your chances of not only advancing, but winning that $1 million grand prize. And there's so many names in this range, even 8th round on, where it's like, I could see all of these guys. There's a window for a lot of them to finish as oh, wow, I didn't expect so-and-so to finish as a top 10 running back, but, they slide in there. And that's what you're kind of looking for in these late rounds. There's some really good value between, Kendre Miller, Blake Corum, Chase Brown as some young guys who maybe could take a big role opportunity, or are we discounting some veterans? Does Nick Chubb come off of that severe injury and kind of keep on producing like he always has? Is Tony Pollard going to have a revival in Tennessee? We talked about Austin Eckler. I believe Mac Nova was in the chat talking about how Najee Harris, we talked about Team 12. They waited until round 7, 8 to even get the running back. But I mean, if you're going to do the double tight end, hammer 4 receivers, I think going Jonathan Brooks, Najee Harris, Trey Benson to start, I like that from an upside perspective. I'm a fan of Team 12's draft and what they're doing. So long story short, a lot of running back names who I think could really change leagues and affect the outcome of the $1 million grand prize in this 8 to 10 range.
What's great about Team 12's running backs is, I said this earlier in the show, it is a young man's position. I mean, there is so rare for guys when they get on that second contract or when towards the end of that first contract to have these massive seasons. It happens, but it doesn't happen all that much. So if you look at what he's done here, he's got 3 rookies, Brooks, Benson, Davis. If one of those guys hit, boom, he's really looking good based on all that draft capital he sunk into his tight ends and receivers. And I like the Najee Harris pick at 801, not necessarily because of the type of player that Harris has been, but because his value is so depressed right now. I mean, wasn't his rookie year? He was like a 2nd or a 3rd round pick. And now people hate him because they love Jalen Warren so much. And that's fine. Hold on, real quick. Warren could easily have a better season than Harris. But when you have the pedigree that Harris has had, the chops to not only bust it inside the tackles, but catch passes as well, on a team with a new quarterback, with a new offensive coordinator that's really focused on the running game, getting Harris at the 801, I know it doesn't feel great, but it might feel great come December or January for sure. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I was just saying Najee Harris is bad at football. That's I think the real issue there. Bulky, how about we spice it up here? Let's bring in Sean Green, who is currently drafted in this draft. Sir, how are you doing today? Thank you for joining the show.
Doing good. Thank you guys for having me.
Sean Green, if anybody remembers, was our guest on Friday's High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. He is a Joe drafting in the FFPC Pros versus Joes this year as well. And Sean, number one, welcome back. Number two, I was wrong. You didn't have the 6 pick. You have the 5 pick tonight, right?
Yeah, ended up being number 5. And the way the draft started off, just I had my eyes on other players. I was thinking, well, maybe I'll be looking at Bijan or Brees Hall, and you just never know how this is going to go. And I love it. I love it. And
yeah, what did you think when you saw the St. Brown pick at 101?
It threw me for a loop. You know, I can see other guys. You know, I can see people still taking, you know, Tyreek. Maybe they like him more than CD or Justin Jefferson.
Jefferson, yeah, exactly.
You know, we saw Brees Hall go number 1 in the hardway draft a couple weeks ago. You know, so nothing really surprises me, and I love Amon-Ra. I have a hard time not taking him in that 4, 5, 6 range myself. So it's a surprise, but it's not, you know.
Did you change?
Why not? Go get your guy.
Go get your guy. Exactly. Did you change the way you were thinking about drafting tight end today when Team 12 went Laporta Kelsey at the 1-2 turn?
Yes and no. I was telling you guys, I did a Fantasy Pros on Memorial Day, and I started Kelsey, McBride, and Ingram just to, you know, give a 3 tight end start just to see how it goes. I like the build. I don't know how it's going to end up, but it didn't throw off my game plan so much. I love Trey McBride. He made it back to me, so I was happy with that. But I can see it, you know, like teams will push the tight ends up the board now once, you know, the top couple are gone, and then another one goes. You start feeling that pressure because it's nice to have an elite tight end, especially in the tight end premium format. It's awesome. You know, when you push it and you're piecing it together, it gets tough. It gets really tough.
Yeah, it does. Let's talk about Devonta Smith here. You get him at the 408 in this draft. Devonta Smith's normally ADP. I thought it was a little bit different. Maybe I'm wrong on this. I guess he normally goes at the 405. So let's not talk about him. What we will talk about here is your first 4 picks, all pass catchers. You wait until the 5th round to draft James Cook. How congruent is that with your strategy that has, you know, during all draft season? Do you like getting those players, those receivers and tight ends earlier and then kind of figuring out running back later? Because you ended up in the meat of this draft, rounds 5 through 9, 4 of those 5 picks were all running backs.
You know, for me, I like to, sometimes I like to play the board and just see how it falls. I'm a running back guy myself, and usually I like to get a stud and then hang on one second.
Sean is on the clock right now at the 1305 pick. He has 2 tight ends, 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, and 4 receivers. It's a highly balanced team. He has just gone Brock Purdy and Trevor Lawrence with his last 2 picks. He could go a lot of different directions here. Sean, you went with Rashid Shaheed. Tell us a little bit about that.
You know, I think the Saints offense is going to be better this year. They brought in Kubiak, who was with the 49ers. He was with the Vikings. I think he was their OC in 2021, I believe. I believe the Saints offense is going to be a lot better. If Derek Carr has to stay healthy, obviously, that's a big thing. You know, he was really beat up last year. You know, I know they're going to play Taysom Hill. You know, Kamara obviously has his role. He's going to catch passes. I don't know if he's going to hold out now. Olave is obviously the clear one, but I love Shaheed. I love his downfield game. You know, it's a nice piece to have just in case. I think. You
know, one of the things I liked about your running backs, we were just talking about Team 12's running backs. Let's talk about yours here. So Cook obviously is the guy, right? That is the starter. These other 3 guys that you drafted, I mean, we don't know about Spears. Maybe he'll start, maybe he won't. I don't think he will. Brian Robinson should start, but who knows there. But all 3 of those guys, Montgomery, Spears, and Robinson, when you take away the starting running back or the other guy in that situation, Montgomery, Spears, and Robinson all become really, really good guys to start in a managed format like the Fantasy Pros Championship. If Gibbs is out, Montgomery's a slam dunk top 12 running back. If Tony Pollard is out, Tyjae Spears becomes an easy top 20 running back. Brian Robinson, the same thing if Eckler misses. And Pollard was hurt last year. Austin Eckler was playing hurt last year. You know, so these are guys that are in situations where I know it's not best ball. You kind of got to figure this out. But if you know ahead of time, man, these are really good guys to start, especially for those pockets of fantasy goodness. And when you pair them with all those, and I love the Godwin pick too, by the way, but when you pair them with those elite pass catchers, this has the makings of what could be a dominant team if the injuries fall your way.
Right. I mean, the running back situations, there's so many teams that have the shared backfields and whatnot. And, Montgomery's kind of the grinder for them. And, Gibbs is the big play guy, obviously. But you kind of just got to hope. I mean, last year, Montgomery put together a solid season. I like Spears. I think he's kind of got some upside and a pass catcher, but him and Pollard have very similar skill sets. So it's going to be interesting to see how they use them. That I don't know, but I want to have him on my roster just in case. And, we talked the other night. You asked me about a guy that I want to get on all my teams, and I told you Brian Robinson, and I heard you slandering him on the stream. I was like, I gotta get in here. I heard you. Like I told you, my opinion. I always liked Eckler, but I don't know if he's hit that clip just yet. But
and to your point,
maybe.
Sean, if Eckler has, then I would like Brian Robinson quite a bit, right? Because then all of a sudden he not only solidifies himself on first and second downs, but he's probably going to be out there in significant amount of third downs. Probably not all of them, but on a significant amount. And at that point, that's all it takes for him to exceed 905 draft value, right?
Right.
The other thing that I love about this, and this isn't really necessarily fantasy now, it's more like fantasy quirky. Back-to-back rounds, you take a quarterback who was the final pick of the draft, and then the next round you take a quarterback who was the first overall pick of the draft, and he's essentially backing up Mr. Irrelevant with Purdy and Trevor Lawrence here. So you have a very balanced team, which is always good to have, headed into the last 5 or 6 rounds of the draft, because you can just scoop up the value where you see it. You can go get your guys without, with kind of reckless abandon here. You're on deck. Tell us what you're kind of thinking here with this 14th round pick. Are you leaning in a direction in any specific direction right now?
I've been looking at the tight ends. There's a couple guys that I still kind of like.
McBride at the 208 right now. Musgrave at the 1008.
Took your guy Musgrave.
There you go.
It's tough.
I do think you need a third tight end before the end of the draft. Now, whether you take him here or not, I think that's the question.
Right. You know what? I am going to take him.
The pick is in. It has been handed to
Jelani Woods.
Another popular player.
Getting some buzz.
Absolutely. Buzz. And he's your third tight end, Sean, too.
I was in on him last year. Obviously he got injured. So I don't think they have Kylan Granson. They have Mo Alley Cox.
Mm-hmm.
But I just like Jelani Woods' game.
Yeah.
I mean, he should be the starter. And in that offense, the Shane Steichen offense in general, I think all those guys are usable pieces.
Sean, so good to have you aboard again.
I appreciate it.
Once again, learning so much from you. I love the structure of your draft. You and I can disagree about the Brian Robinson pick, but I will say I definitely could see a path where that pick is really, really good. We will continue to follow you on the X at _green_1. It's right on the screen there. Thank you so much, dude. Good luck in Pros versus Joes. I have a feeling we'll have you on during the Pros versus Joes draft as well.
Absolutely. Let me know. I'm there. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Sean.
That's Sean Green, longtime FFPC and fantasy football veteran. Joined us on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. Yeah, he's getting a lot of airtime this year, Aiden.
As he should.
Was on the HSFF Hour, was on the show tonight, and he'll be on Pros versus Joes as well. So good stuff there. There's a question in the chat.
A good one,
buddy,
too.
Mac Nova. Balky, do you think the Kraft injury does anything for Musgrave's role this season? Let me tell you about Tucker Kraft's pec injury. Now, he tore it. There was 2 Packers that actually tore pecs in off-season workouts. Tucker Kraft is the only one we care about for fantasy. The other one was alignment.
The new hamstring for the Packers.
Yes, exactly. Well, the other thing is the Packers fired. I don't know if they fired their strength and conditioning guy, but there's a lot of complaints, obviously, with the soft tissue injuries that the Packers had. I mean, they're sending Eric Stokes and Christian Watson out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison to have this weird, these tests being done on them. So that was a concern. And then they hire the guy who was the assistant strength and conditioning coordinator for the Niners, who have been doing excellent work keeping Christian McCaffrey healthy out there, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then he comes in, and then there's torn pecs, and it's so. What I will say about Kraft is, I listen to a lot of sports talk radio. I talk with people who cover the Packers. I seem to be the only one concerned about this Kraft injury. Nobody else. Everybody's kind of, it's the offseason. It happened at the facility. He's getting it. Kraft missed some time last year too. So here's the thing. I think it's probably going to be okay. I don't think it has made Musgrave go up in drafts at all. Musgrave, bear in mind, he was hurt last year too, but it was like a lacerated kidney. I mean, I don't know how you replicate that. Is he more likely to lacerate his kidney now because he's already done it once? I don't think so. So I haven't seen Kraft's injury affect Musgrave at all. But yeah, I mean, there is something I mean, if we get to training camp and they're saying that Kraft is still working with the rehab team, yeah, I have concerns with it. So I don't necessarily know if I'm going to be drafting him. Kraft is a tough guy to roster in this format because he really only had big games when Musgrave was out last year. So I don't necessarily know if I can give any tangible advice there. And I don't think it affects it a whole lot. But as a Packers fan, yeah, I'm concerned about the Kraft injury for sure.
Team 7 is on the clock right now, and they're also in the chat. They're asking us, Balky, if we can just kind of rate their team, give us their thoughts.
Team 7, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I highlighted here, I think they're having, just a quick glance over, a very solid draft. I mean, I'm a big Breece Hall believer. Like, the Amon-Ra first overall to me is a little bit, like, I know it's go get your guy.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see a path personally where he finishes as a wide receiver 1, let alone the first overall player. Breece Hall, I see the path to him being a contender to finish as that top overall player in fantasy. So I love that pick. Like everyone else, I love Marvin Harrison. I mean, Kyle Pitts has, scarred many a fantasy player before. But I mean, overall, this team is very solid. I mean, if I would give the picks I don't agree with, TJ Hawkinson has just too many unknowns based on his recovery and timeline for me to take within even the first 10 rounds, let alone what even quarterback situation, what kind of offense he's even coming back to, and how long it will take him to even ramp up, even if he was only missing 6 weeks. So I'm just staying away. I know you said there's people who you never want to say I'm not drafting. TJ Hawkinson in the first 10 rounds, I'm personally not drafting. But I mean, I want to hear, though. I'm intrigued. I was going to ask you earlier, but now that we're reviewing this, your former love, sombrero wearing Aaron Jones, now on the enemy for you.
Yeah.
I think it was
the Vikings
have picked surprising.
Up, the Vikings have picked up sloppy seconds from the Packers for decades, so this is no surprise that he went there.
It was a bit surprising, at least them signing Josh Jacobs and the sticker shock before you actually read about the actual deal. 4 years, $40 million. Whoa, like they're doing that, and then Aaron Jones is getting cut, and then he signs with the Vikings. Team 7 takes him. What are your expectations for Aaron Jones? Hasn't really shown an ability to stay healthy recently. He's getting up there in age, kind of going to an unknown backfield in terms of, is it going to be Sam Darnold? Is it going to be JJ McCarthy? What does that mean? What are your thoughts on Aaron Jones?
All right, so I'll do the Jones question. Then I wanted 7 is one of the, I think, most fascinating teams. Maybe not the most fascinating, because I think number 1 might be that, but it's one of the most fascinating teams in this draft. Regarding the Aaron Jones thing, so I have said for years that in fantasy drafts, this guy is undervalued and he should be going much higher than he is. And I think by and large, that almost always played out. This past year, everybody wants to talk about the 5 games he had at the end of the season, 5 straight 100-yard rushing games, including against the San Francisco 49ers, who ended up being conference champions. Bear in mind that if the Packers would have held on to beat the Niners, Aaron Jones wasn't playing against the Lions the next week because he suffered a significant soft tissue injury against the Niners that would have knocked him out for the rest of the season. That's bad, but that would have been his 3rd significant injury of the season, right? He had the hamstring injury in week 1 when he was dominating the Bears, right? And then he missed a bunch of time. Then he hurt his knee, and then he missed a bunch of time. And then he hurt his – that's 3 significant injuries, soft tissue injuries, for a guy who is not a young man anymore as far as running backs go. The Packers and him agreed to a pay cut coming into the 2023 season. The Packers asked him to take another significant pay cut coming into the season. He and his agent both said no. I do believe that Aaron Jones loves the Packers and the Packers loved Aaron Jones, but all the love in the world for loyalty to a team, I would be putting my body and my career first. And he had an opportunity to make more money with the Vikings or somewhere, right? He was going to get paid somewhere. And the Packers quickly pivoted when they found out they could get Josh Jacobs. The Josh Jacobs contract is there's a lot of funny money with that. Packers can easily get out of that contract.
It's a one-year deal.
Basically a one-year deal, right? That said, with Aaron Jones on this team, he isn't your number one. He's not your number two. He's your number 3 running back here. So you can deal a little bit with injury if he does miss some time because you have 2 running backs in front of him. Now,
but one of those running backs is Alvin Kamara. That's
what I was going to get into. Kamara is a guy I am fading this year. Kamara is a guy that I think showed age last year that, and maybe he wasn't being used properly. I don't know. But I'm really starting to hear a lot of buzz about Kendra Miller, which is unfortunate because I really liked him. And now he's going to be going at a higher price. I think that's the running back you want in New Orleans this year for the price. I would have want to see a different running back other than Kamara as my number 2 if I'm taking Jones my number 3, which they don't know. I mean, they don't know how the draft's going to fall. But you look at Kenneth Walker, even James Conner, Zamir White to some degree. I think that those players would have been more interesting as Kamara instead of Kamara there. That said, Kamara is still a talented pass catcher. He's not going to go away from the game plan. What I think is so fascinating about this team is you see so much youth and explosion and ceiling early on. Breece Hall, Marvin Harrison, Kyle Pitts, right? You have those 3 guys. If they hit, God knows what the ceiling is for him. I just took Breece Hall at the 103 of the Kentucky draft a week or so ago. So I like him this year. So much explosive talent there. Now, as we move on, what do we see with Team 7? We see the getting longer in the tooth, but not long in the tooth yet, Stephon Diggs. Keenan Allen at the end of his career. Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, guys that have their best football behind them. TJ Hawkinson, who is not an old guy, but I'm with you. I don't know what we can count on this year. Tyler Lockett, Gus Edwards, all these guys, like as the draft went on, he got that stability, right? And normally you think you draft stability first and then you swing for the fences, right? That's not what happened here. Even if you look later on in his draft, Adam Thielen, Jonnu Smith, like these are players, we've seen them do it before. So what's going to be interesting about Team 7 is if those players at the top end hit, or if 2 of those players hit, how is that going to be enough given all this veteran stability and maybe limited ceiling that you have? Is that explosion going to be enough to carry you to the $1 million grand prize? It's going to count on Hall, Harrison, and Pitts. You want to win 7 figures, you're probably going to need all 3 of those guys to hit. But if you look at this is exactly the type of team an NFL GM would draft, who knows nothing about fantasy football. They're like, oh yeah, I'll get the younger guys, and then I get all these veterans right in the locker room with them that can really show these guys how to win. This is exactly the type of team that they would draft. So you have a lot of stability. I don't think this is going to be a bad team. I think unless it gets really hammered with injuries, I think that this is an average team, worst case scenario, but it could be the champs of the league and it could go deep in the championship round. It all depends on those first 3 picks.
I have a little take for you. This is kind of just off the cuff, but I'm so in on Jonnu Smith for his ADP. I don't know about you.
There is something to be said for that. I mean, he's going super late. He has shown out in his other stops in his career that he can get it done. I try not to let the Arthur Smith thing blind me because, Jonnu Smith was so good last year. And part of that was Arthur Smith just messing with us as fantasy players. But I always bring this up. Joe Del Zanero, legendary FFPC player, Baker boy. He could write a book. He's like the Yogi Berra of fantasy football. And one of the things he always said was there's no such thing as a bad pick after the 10th round. And when you're investing 15th round draft capital in a Jonnu Smith, especially as your number 3 tight end, I think that is a good way to open up the wallet and spend that money, that draft capital on that type of draft pick there.
Like I think I said it last show, and I don't have the exact stat in front of me, but there's always for a crazy number of years in a row, there's always a tight end being drafted outside of like the top 18 tight ends who finishes as a top 6 or 7 tight end of the year.
Always.
Every year. I think Jonnu Smith is going to be that guy this year. Like if I'm planting a flag on any of these late rounders, he would be my flag plant.
Listen, I could plant a flag on it, but that soil is more like sand. So my flag would fall over every time. Jonnu Smith is fine, but we just talked up Jelani Woods and what he could be in Indy. You have a potential quasi air raid offense now in Tennessee with Will Levis and all the pass catchers they brought in there. What about Chiga Okonkwo? I know there's plenty of people that are big fans of Cade Otton. Wouldn't surprise me at all to see him take advantage of maybe some aging receivers on that team missing some time, and then he gets in and crushes it. Juwan Johnson, I don't see it happening with the surgery with him. Isaiah Likely. What if Mark Andrews misses? Likely is drafted as a tight end 21 here. I don't think, like, if you are a high stakes FFPC player, there are three types of FFPC players, right? These are the three types. Those who love Ben Sinnott, those who love Tyler Conklin, and those who love both those players, right? And those two guys one of those guys could be that top 6 tight end this year. Wouldn't surprise me at all. I know there's a lot of love for Conklin. It's Aaron Rodgers. Well, historically, if you look back, not like Aaron Rodgers always threw to his tight ends. You know, Robert Tonyan had that one season, but that was heavily affected by all the tight ends he caught that year. You have to really go back to, I would say, even pre-Jared Cook, I think you have to go back
Michael Finley.
Right.
Yeah.
And if he wouldn't have hurt his neck or whatever it was, I think it was a neck thing. I mean, those guys in preseason, they were just playing pitch and catch. It was insane. And that could have been special. It wasn't. So Conklin's fine because he's still in the 12th round right now. It's weird for me to say temper your Conklin expectations because he's in the 12th. Who cares? But I am maybe not as bullish as some people in the industry are.
There are sometimes each year there's names. So now this is my 3rd year doing live draft coverage. And obviously I love doing it with you. I usually do it with Terp. There are some names we'll look back on and it will be fun. And I'll even tell Terp names that just got him super excited or names that get me super riled up. When you have Theo and Terp on Thursday on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show covering the best ball, bring up Tyler Conklin and just watch those two go. I mean, and I just don't see it. I'm not seeing it for Tyler Conklin. I'm just completely off that.
I will not going to do it. I will say that, okay, just regarding Conklin real quick.
I see the vision. I'm not buying into it.
Right. I get it. And that makes sense. But if you look at what he's done the last 3 years and understand that the last 2 years were with the Jets, the 2021 was the Vikings, dude had at least 58 catches all 3 of those years. I don't know if you know this, Aiden, but I believe FFPC has tight end premium scoring.
Yeah,
so those, yes. And I know you know that. I'm just messing with you. But to get 58 catches is your worst year in the last 3 years, above 500 yards receiving every year. Yeah, the touchdowns weren't there. Dude had 61 catches for over 600 yards last year. Didn't get in the end zone. That's with a bad quarterback or really bad quarterback play. So I get why, maybe Aaron Rodgers doesn't have to lift him to the next level, but a rising tide raises all boats, and Conklin is one of those boats on the sea of Aaron Rodgers. So that could certainly be another reason why Conklin. And the thing is, it's every player has their price, right? If he keeps getting steamed up, and where did he go tonight? Conklin was tight end 19. If all of a sudden he's like tight end 13 or 14, people are going to cool off on him, right? Like they're getting their Conklin shares in now, and he continues to rise. How far will he get? I don't know, but it's already June 18th. Like we're in the thick of drafting season, and it'll be fascinating to watch him, especially when we get through pros versus Joes and everything like that too.
McNova pointing also just ton of targets relatively for a guy in Tyler Conklin. So again, I see the vision. Maybe I should rephrase it too. It's not even that I can see the vision. And when I say I'm not buying into it, it's almost more so some people are projecting him to just almost kind of what I did with Jonnu, right? And just really hyping it up and saying he's going to be top 10. People are doing that for Conklin. I just feel as though he's going to settle in and not be kind of that weapon, that steal, that kind of later round value that people are talking about. I'm going to ask you a question that got asked last week, and I'm going to do it to not maybe some of our guests. Can't guarantee all of them, but a lot of them and all my co-hosts. Me and Terp talked about it extensively in the last couple of rounds. I think it's fascinating. I considered it, but up until the question was asked, didn't really fully think it through. The new kickoff rule. all accounts is going to dramatically increase touchdowns on that play on kickoff returns. It's going to change the way special teams coordinators teams are thinking about it. Could you see your star players, lining up as kickoffs? Because it's essentially, from what I've read about it and gathered, it's more similar to essentially a handoff. You're not having guys flying at you at 25 miles per hour, full speed to tackle you. How does that impact defenses? Does that push defenses up the board? Are you trying to stack defenses? Like, imagine if Tyreek Hill's back there, right? And then all of a sudden you're taking Dolphins defense double. Have you given that any thought? Or is there a defense that you kind of like? Or is this going to be, me and Turpo said the cop-out answer, which is we have no idea. It's going to be an in-season adjustment, I think, for a lot of people. And I think next year, if that rule stays in place, people will have a way better idea of how to attack it and take advantage. But what are your thoughts on maybe the new kickoff alignment affecting fantasy?
I think I'm not going to completely cop out here. I do think I have some insight. Please. So number one, I'm a horrible person to ask for this. Like, I'm never the first. I usually wait till there's like 7 or 8 defenses off the board before I start looking at one. And a lot of times I'll just look at the week 1 schedule, right? Because I love playing streaming defenses every week. That's just how I've always played. And I will look at who is the biggest favorite, or maybe a low total where somebody is like a 7-point favorite and the total is like 40 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'll go after that defense. I think it was last year. I got Philly in a lot of spots because it was a low total and they were a big favorite. So that's typically how I like to do it. Now, regarding the kickoff rule, I think we'll know more because I think teams are going to experiment more with that, with different ways to approach that in the preseason, right? And once we see for our own eyes how the kickoffs are happening and whether there are these big returns or whether there are like, more scoring on that, then I think we can adjust with defenses then. Because defense to me is such a week-to-week position, I'm not changing the way I do anything in regards to drafting defenses right now. I reserve the right to change my mind come August when I actually see some preseason ball. But as of right now, it's just another moving part, right? It's like you have an automatic watch, with the movement in there. It's got all the gears and everything's turning. It's kind of like adding an additional gear to that, right? So that it's part of the whole equation, but it doesn't make the whole thing move by itself. So for me, it's difficult when that's my approach. It's difficult for me to say I need to be focusing on this position a little bit earlier than I normally would. It's just not the case for me.
No, I treat defense the same way, but it's definitely the first time in genuinely years where it's like, do I have to even consider like changing up my strategy? Because when I started playing fantasy at like 9-10 years old, and it was 9-10 year olds, literally that's when I started. It's like defenses was way cooler, and then you get even just a little bit older, and like, yep, I'm just going to wait till the final 2 rounds to deal with my defense and kicker. There's definitely some thought to it, and each time we ask this, the chat has been sharing some. Pittsburgh is Cordero. Is he going to be the one likely returning it? They're saying the Jets. Philly has a good opening. Start of the season.
Mike, so I think Mike
Cooper DeJean might be returning kickoffs for the Eagles, and
I think Mike McDaniel's crazy enough to put like Tyreek Hill or somebody like that. Right. And 100%. and then the question becomes, if Tyreek Hill is back there, knowing how talented he is, then the question is not, do I bump up the Dolphins? Do I bump up Tyreek Hill? Like if I'm considering a receiver in the first round, in like the middle of the round, like. And we didn't have Sean Green this, but maybe he was like, Jamar Chase or Tyreek Hill. Well, Chase isn't going to be returning any kicks this year, but Hill might. Maybe I take him there. And when you have razor thin decisions like that in the first round, that could be something that actually changes the way that you draft, maybe not the defenses, but the players themselves.
Yeah, and the Dolphins are weird because it's exciting to think about Tyreek Hill. It's exciting to think about A-Chain. In reality, they have so much speed. It's probably going to be Jalen Wright. Like, if I don't know, like, that's also, it might not be. I don't know, but like, if they're probably going with one of their speedsters, I assume it would be the kind of the most expendable running back. But who knows? As you said, preseason, it's going to dramatically change. But like, let's say preseason, we see a bunch of returns for touchdown. Defenses probably start creeping up a little bit more than we usually see.
That's my whole point. Like, if we see that, then yes, I think you're foolish if you don't adjust. I like the idea of having a really fast running back. Like, I think that's the prototype. As I understand it right now, all these kickoffs are going to be. I think that's the prototype. A running back with vision, but also the game-breaking speed. Now, that's a rare combination, but to your point, I think Jalen Wright has both those things.
I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. I mean, you also look at I believe the XFL, UFL had this, and there was definitely more. It wasn't this absolutely crazy amount more. Like it's going to go from the NFL. It seemingly rarely happens. It's once in a while, every couple of weeks. It might become a little more consistent, but nothing I think dramatic. But just again, as we said, just enough to be like, do we change it? You said that's the mold. I mean, one of the reasons, Kevontae Turpin is now with the Dallas Cowboys was part of his return acumen in those spring leagues and his success at returning kickoffs and punts.
Mm-hmm.
What a quick draft! An hour and 11 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, it was insane.
It was well done by all involved.
These are the when you're commissioning online drafts for the FFPC, like I do, this is what you dream about at night. 71-minute draft where we didn't have any issues tonight. Everybody was on point. Everybody, great job for all the 12 teams that are watching. If they are all watching, fantastic draft tonight and a fun draft. Lot of meat on the bone to chew on here.
If John Terry's in the chat asking us to pick the winner,
and he was,
I don't even always say that. I don't even. Sometimes I do. I'll just say for this one, make it easy. Is there a team that you really liked what they did? You can even do. I'm going to give it a quick glance over. I'll share mine, but I'm intrigued if you kind of had one that stuck out to you.
Yeah, I mean, we talked significant. Well, we didn't really talk a whole lot about one after the first 4 or 5 rounds, but I think one is a really that's the most fun team, right? When you take them on round St. Brown number 1, getting your guy there. When you take Pacheco, almost a full round ahead. I like people hate on Amari Cooper, and myself included. I think I need to open my mind to Amari Cooper up a little bit more.
Talk about a guy holding out, Amari Cooper.
Yeah, Cooper, and then Hopkins again. If the Titans are, this is not the Derrick Henry Titans anymore. They're going to pass the ball, so I like that pick as well. Odunze at the 901 could be significant if Allen or Moore were to miss time, and Caleb Williams is the real deal. There were some picks I didn't care for. I think Mostert went a little too early. I think Chubb went a little too early. I'm not a big Cortland Sutton guy, and Burton could be good in the 14th round. I don't know if Khalil Herbert makes the team. So 1 was a fun team. I don't know if it's my favorite. I said 7. Worst case scenario is a mediocre team, but it could be a really dominant team. We talked about 12 and how I really liked how he handled his running backs after getting all those pass catchers led by Laporta and Kelsey. And I think Theo Greminger was in the YouTube chat earlier, and he thinks that Laporta and X, tight end X, whatever tight end you want to take, Kelsey, McBride, Andrews, whoever, he thinks that's going to become more and more popular as the draft goes on. So I like that draft. 8, team 8, I think was a team that drafted for explosiveness and drafted for winning $1 million. Justin Jefferson was the 101 in a lot of drafts last year. He's the 108 today. London, I said, I wouldn't be surprising. I could tell myself a story that he sneaks up into the first round by the time we're in Las Vegas for the FFPC live events. Cooper Kupp should be great, regardless of Puka Nakua's health. But if Nakua were to go down, all of a sudden Kupp could be a target monster again. We talked about Brock Bowers. Getting Lamar Jackson, the slim down Lamar Jackson in the mid-6th round, I'm a fan of. Stevenson and Pollard for waiting until the 7th and 8th round to draft your running backs. That could be big. I love the Jerome Ford pick at the 10:05. Not a fan of the Jerry Jeudy pick. They're not all winners, kids. I talked about the Chiga Conquo pick in the 14th round. I think there's something to be said for that. And then the back-to-back picks in the 18th and 19th. Theo Johnson, who could be the starting tight end in New York, who might be the most talented tight end in New York now that Waller is, I think, going to retire. And then I'll tell you, Luke McCaffrey has been picking up some steam too. A guy, if he is the starting slot receiver for Washington last year, this guy caught 130 balls the last 2 years at college. And granted, it was at Rice or whatever, but still, Luke McCaffrey, if he's the starting slot guy for Washington, that is a total plug and play on bye weeks or injury issues where you can stick him in at flex and he's going to get it done for you, or at least he should get it done for you if he is the starting slot. So team 8 I liked quite a bit as well. I have not gone through the rest of them, but those are just a few of my favorites. Team 11 I think is really solid too. Only one running back in the first 7 rounds, but then just the onslaught of running backs after that. Zach Moss and Eckler and Corum and Jalen Wright and Chuba Hubbard after getting 2 tight ends and Evan Engram and George Kittle in rounds 4 and 6. I don't know if they have enough receivers. I mean, if Pearsall hits, sure, but to only draft 4 receivers on this team, or excuse me, 5 receivers, right? Yeah, 5 receivers on this team. It's risky. And with Stroud going as your quarterback in the 7th, I would have taken another chance on a running back late. I know they drafted Estime and Shipley, but you don't need Mayfield and Rodgers when you have Stroud. Just pick one and go with a running back there or a wide receiver. Some player that is either going to be something come that first waiver wire run prior to week 1, or you can just get rid of them and pick up somebody else. So I thought it was good in theory. I thought the execution of it maybe left a little bit desired, but I do know who Team 11 is, and they won a ton of money playing fantasy football too. So it's hard to criticize.
I think the chat seems to be in agreement, and they're saying it best. Sometimes you leave a draft that either you moderated, right? We had on our live draft coverage, you see on X, and you're like, oh, there's a clear best team. There's a clear 2 or 3 that stand out. I mean, this draft across the board is even. And I mean by that, I feel like each team had some really good picks. And I think, as you said, I would say pretty much every team on here had some missed opportunities or kind of missed picks, in my opinion. So that leads to a very even draft where I don't think any team really stands out in terms of, I think they're way better than the rest. Teams stand out. Like, to me, I do like Team 12 because the build stands out to me. Going 2 tight ends early. And they're the one that stand out. And I would, if I'm giving a winner, because I just really like the construction that they did. And if you're going to kind of go 0 RB, how they did it, they get Jordan Love, they get Will Levis. But really good draft. This is a draft. ADP was thrown out the window. That's why you watch our Fantasy Pros Championship live draft coverages. That's why you play in the Fantasy Pros Championship over at myffpc.com. $1 million grand prize on the line, over $6 million in the prize pool. If you're a new player to the FFPC, use code YouTube25. You'll get $25 off your first team. That's going to do it for myself. Balky, thank you as always for joining. You have more live coverage on the Better Sports Network High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Thursday, starting at 7 p.m. Theo Greminger, Dave Turp drafting live. I believe a couple of spots still remain. Go to myffpc.com. It will be listed as live on HSFF show on the draft page, and you'll see which league it is. The draft itself starts at 7:30, and then we'll be back next Tuesday. I believe it's me and Turp on the call 8:30 next Tuesday for another Fantasy Pros Championship. Then before you know it, main event live coverage are going to be kicking off in early July. So thank you to all in the chat who were here.
Real quick,
please.
Just let me get one
Floor
thing.
Is yours. Floor is yours.
I made the command decision this morning. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour will not air this Friday at its normal time. It will actually be airing right on the channel you're watching right now tomorrow, Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern time with myself and Farrell Elliott. So that's the next time we'll go live. Then the Better Sports Network double coverage on the BSN and the FFPC YouTube. And then you guys once again on Tuesday with more live draft coverage every single week on Tuesdays until the start of the NFL season, which is fast approaching.
That's going to do it for myself, Eric Balkman. We will see you guys real soon. Thank you to all who tuned in. Bye-bye.